I got a notification that tells me you're recording the call. How nicely ethical.
Yeah, that's pretty nice, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. So,
so I guess this is technically our like maiden voyage into podcast
I know
territory. It seems like we should have some kind of grand introduction, describe our goals for the project and introduce ourselves and all that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yes. Okay.
I mean, I have no idea how to do that or approach it, but
right. So, well, I mean, I suppose, yeah, I mean, the only thing that's coming to mind now is just what we've said sometimes, that I feel like I would like more collaboration between sync people.
Yes.
And I feel that there was like a golden age of that in like 2007 to whenever.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's sort of I don't know. That's sort of what I'm thinking about with this podcast at the moment. Kind of reactivate a sort of always record kind of thing, which sort of sounds a bit arrogant, but I don't know. There's something about that.
Yeah, well, it just seems like there's room to think about perhaps some of the more off-road areas of sync, in a more public and collaborative way.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited, in fact, not to put too many premature definitions or boundaries on what this thing is going to be, but kind of
yeah. No,
let it emerge out of the conversation.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, in fact, I mean, this is kind of jumping just for a second into the movie stuff, but it's like yesterday I saw Arrival, the movie, and the whole idea of each sort of country in that movie needs to collaborate to understand the aliens.
Yeah, that's a very cool aspect of that movie, I think.
Like, it really, I thought that was interesting to be the sort of the movie that I watched just before kind of embarking on a podcast thing, because
yeah, very interesting.
I think that at least, so getting into like our personal projects and stuff, like I've been sort of just making videos on my own for a few years, and it is sort of, there is definitely something you can't tap into that way.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
Totally. But, real human interaction and is the main thing that's missing.
Basics. But
well, no, that's a very good point. That's a funny dynamic with this work, because some degree of isolation is necessary, of course, to
exactly
to engage with the inner fantasy material. That stuff just doesn't, at least for me. I consider myself like a pretty creative person, but but it's still hard to it's just hard to get into your own. It's hard to sink into yourself in situations where other people are involved. It's like I find that I need to be genuinely creative. I need like a week or two almost of total isolation to especially early, when you're trying to find that quiet signal in the project. You don't know quite what it is yet, and you're just waiting for the inspiration. For me, that's often been quite a bit about solitude. But on the other hand, it's like there's we've spoken about this before, but there's like a weird dynamic with sync where somehow that's aligning you with death in some kind, that's like, I don't know if that's the primary. The primary thing is you're in this weird loop that's hopefully going to help you. But an aspect of that loop is is eating the excrement, right? That's so sort of fundamental to this whole alchemical thing.
Yeah.
So maybe it's good not to eat the excrement all day long, forever, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we can take a break from eating excrement and discuss, why we're doing that,
Yeah. I mean,
that we're doing it for the right reasons, or whatever the case.
Yeah, I mean, just as drawn like a cliche, but it reminds me of the Terence McKenna thing about going into the psychedelic experience and then coming back into the tribe.
Yes.
That somehow, on the one hand, the psychedelic experience, I mean, it couldn't be more distanced from the tribe, but or at least McKenna's idea was that you would try to focus on things that could be brought back, kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, saying it right now, I'm not sure if I completely agree with that. Like, I think there are things that can't be explained and that that we try. I think that maybe there is something good in trying to convey things that are very difficult.
I definitely agree. Well, I think actually there's a tremendous amount of ambiguity baked into this shamanic thing. Just, we talk about this sometimes as the mind blow or whatever, and there are weird ethical considerations there, right? Of like, how is it appropriate to if you're the kind of person that has the ability to detonate a situation for somebody, and plunge them into some kind of a realization, or that maybe I actually think that's probably. I think there's a huge zone of unexplored bad behavior that is particular to shamanic personality types and practitioners,
Oh, yeah.
And I think that McKenna, who I also love, by the way, but I think that he does maybe underestimate that a little bit, maybe, or just focus. I mean, he's on a mission to like reintroduce the shamanic mindset or worldview into the Western discourse. So he is kind of proselytizing for it, which is quite great and appropriate. But I often worry. I worry at least about myself. Like, are my motivations always good with this stuff? The answer, of course, is they're not. A lot of times my motivations are just pretty terrible. Like, I just want to be the bit. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think we need to delve into like hardcore psychoanalysis right off the bat. But I'll refrain from doing that. But yeah, there's definitely a issues to discuss there, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know it's funny because, again, watching Arrival, kind of, there's this thing that there is going to be like a universal language.
Yes,
that sort of unlocks a completely different way of thinking about time, a non-linear way of thinking about time. And the way that Amy Adams gets access to that language, it seemed to me, was by perceiving patterns in some really weird, like random data.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like, it really felt about sync in that sense.
Weird data that's almost explicitly sent through a display, right? Yeah. Exactly. It's like a two-dimensional ink thing behind a piece of glass. It's.
Yeah, no, that is strange because then it's like, on the one hand, I felt as if, well, that movie on the one hand inspired me about the whole sync thing, that there is something about sync that unlocks new kind of reality tunnels or something, and that the way the movie presents it is that there is like a really tense geopolitical scenario.
Yeah.
And that somehow sort of Sync magically kind of
yeah. Sync literally saves the world in that movie. Yeah. It's so funny.
And it's weird because I think my reaction to that is that on the one hand, I completely believe that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also see that it's such a goofy kind of
it's ridiculous
simplification, and I think the movie so knows that. But
yes, yeah. Well, it's not, it's never clear if that isn't all just kind of a metaphor for divergent aspects coming together into a more adaptive unity to solve crisis, which is all just psychological at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I like that sort of the countries as a, because at the end she's in like this sort of dinner party. There's all the flags from all the countries. It's such a sort of unreal.
Yeah, it's a scenario at that point. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Well, because it's also it's tied in with this whole precognitive thing, which confers a surreality onto it. But don't you feel as if you're just kind of living in that very often?
Yes.
That's the thing. Like the world becomes rather surreal post Sync, I think. Yeah.
Yes. And I
suppose. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no. Just that I think that the thing that most struck me or worried me about Arrival is that
worried. It's a good word. Yeah.
It really reminds me to try and, on the one hand, I want to try and stay as rational as possible, but at the same time, there is, like you say, there is like an inflation aspect that not an inflation aspect, but something about saving the world.
Yeah. Which can very easily become an inflation thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's almost like there is also, for me, a positive aspect about the saving the world narrative, in the sense that it can be an inflation if you think that you as an individual are going to do that. Like that's a sort of a schizophrenic thing. But there is also like again, returning to McKenna, this thing that it seems that a lot of our problems have to do with consciousness or awareness, and that if Sync has something to do with unlocking different areas of awareness, then it does seem to be very important.
It does. I really think at this point, here's my kind of subjective take on this. There's a point for me where I just detected this kind of shift where it feels to me like I'm talking myself out of something now, It's like I kind of know this is true somehow.
Yeah.
Sync is important in a bigger way than just some weird internet outsiders, making making funny YouTube videos. Like that's we're all doing that. But there's it's so centrally located in this I don't want to call it a Jungian thing, because it ties it down to that tradition so specifically, but like you said, that the process of psychological transformation and awareness, like it's not, I don't know if it's the same phenomenon, but it's somehow entrained to it like super tightly. So in as much as the future is about more awareness happening, which I hope it is, I think Sync is going to be a major player in that process. In some form. I think that we're engaging with it in a very larval way. That's the thing. I think we're kind of scratching at a tip still. It's hard to talk about this, right? Because I think a lot of us feel that we've scratched past a tip in a certain way.
Yeah.
But I mean more about the temporal iceberg, the tip of it as it's unfolding in time. How does sync change the culture, and what would happen? What would happen if any of these ideas were actually taken seriously in a larger way? It's funny that it does start to kind of, for me, my mind does start to drift in slightly apocalyptic directions with that stuff, because I think that huge belief system overhauls are often very bloody and chaotic things,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's funny because the thing about like how this will affect culture through time, it's I think that's one of the interesting things about the Sync book, that I think that people from the Sync book have spoken about this on podcasts, that there is a certain discouragement. There's something discouraging about spending years releasing material and it's seemingly not getting a lot of attention. But I was thinking the other day that, like you say, I think that it has had a big effect, at least like in the sense that like
yes, it has a very big effect in the future. we're just not there yet to see the flowering of the effect, I think. Now, of course, I would say that, as a really impossible Sync super fan or whatever, but seems that way to me with this stuff sometimes. Like the weird synciness that surrounds the work is a backwards projection of its effect.
Right.
Because that seems to be the whole idea with this 9/11 stuff. It's like, it has to be big enough to generate the. See, I want sometimes it doesn't seem to work that way though too. So I think maybe we should issue a blanket statement here, since this is our first podcast episode. That everything we say, we are always trying to hold in awareness like what the opposite position is, or not even opposite necessarily, just potentially compensating views. So it can get tedious to constantly note that at every stage of a discussion. So we probably won't, right? But I think we're probably hoping not to not to make statements that are designed to be sort of isolated and taken as concrete final words on things, because we don't have any idea what we're doing. So
no, exactly. I mean, it's all experimental in this sense. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
It's like experimental music, but with podcast.
Exactly.
Like,
although at the same time, I also want to be able to make bold statements that I don't have the right to make, and so on. So
yeah.
We'll probably
no, I totally, like, I think that it's funny. No, the thing about it having an effect precisely because it's had an effect in the future, all that.
Right.
It's funny because that
sounds so just insane when it's put that concisely.
Yeah, but it is like that does seem to be how precognitive dreams.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Yeah,
as well, that you remember them. At least the ones I've had, it's sort of, they feel different, and then you never know which one is going to be precognitive or not. But it's as if the charge from the future is already bleeding back into the
that's thing. The thing. There just is a persistent association, it seems to me, between that feeling and then it's as if the feeling is just related, I think, to the level of depth. Maybe it's like you've had a dream that's emerging from a transpersonal layer of the psyche, let's say, right? And that's just identifiable. It's like the language shifts and the whole tone and tenor of it shifts, and there's this weird gravity in it, and it's orbiting around archetypes suddenly. It's no longer a dream about my test that I bombed, and I'm
Yeah.
reliving some specific thing related to the day, right? Or maybe it is that, but there's now this additional weird context on top of it. Yeah, that. Yeah.
No, it's funny because
Thank you for jumping in there. I think I lost my train of thought. That's going to happen a lot as well, by the way. Sync is just the most loopy possible thing to think about. So.
No, exactly. I mean, it's funny because I have no idea where I'm going with this, but the Arrival again.
Yeah. Okay, good. let's get back to the text. That's always
exactly. But there is something about Arrival that what you said before about trying to discourage yourself from something, or like even though you've seen the reality of it.
Right.
What I kind of felt with Arrival is that there are layers of reality to this that you think you have come to terms with and you haven't.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I feel like, I mean, Sync in itself is kind of a testament to that, in that you can see a sync and it will be like the 100th time that you've seen that kind of sync, and it will still impress you.
Yeah.
There's something about the ego that kind of refuses to completely take it for granted. And with time, I feel like what you were saying before, there was like a boiling point where I feel like, God, personally, at least, I was watching the film and there were a lot of sort of synchronicities for me that were revolving around that. And
like live synchronicities as you were watching, or immediately before or following the viewing.
Yes, exactly. And
yeah, it's so weird with that stuff. Like, I've had it's really strange, that stuff. Particularly if there are kind of synchronicities embedded in the film that are stacking with the live synchronicities. Like, so it kind of becomes part of one big structure. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to explain. Like it's not just that you're having a personal synchronicity experience in its own little domain, and then there's some syncs that you're tracking in the film, but that the syncs in the film are kind of, it's almost as if they start spilling out of the frame into the real world. Like there can be, like I've had things where numbers appear in a film that are part of weird patterns I'm noticing in the film that then are aligning with like the clock time or things while I'm watching them occur, like on screen, like to get like just insane, unreproducible things like that.
And I think that is sort of like, for me at least, I felt it to be sort of a danger zone kind of, because on the one hand, it's like in Arrival, it's a movie about contact from non-human intelligence kind of getting in touch with humans to convey certain something through a movie screen, through something that looks like a movie screen inside the movie. So the movie is already about that.
Right.
But then the personal syncs seem to drive the point home, almost as if I needed to watch that film at exactly that time.
Yeah.
So that you have to, I feel like you have to be careful at that point, because it's like you're passing a threshold, because you could very easily say, well, let's jump to the next level, right? Let's sort of completely accept that aliens are getting in touch with me or something like that. And of course, the Jungian model is useful with that, to sort of add a little bit of abstraction. The Robert Anton Wilson thing is
Oh man, you just really hit something on the head there. Yeah, it adds abstraction, which makes it feel safer. That's a weird thing with
That's funny. Yeah, it does make it feel safer. And
in the typical way, it's just, here's a bunch of language. Now it's explained. You don't have to worry about it anymore. You know, Jung's not trying to do that consciously, but he ends up doing it anyway. But it's hard to know how not to do that. If you're going to make a map of this stuff, you know, the point of having a map is to make the journey a little safer, or at least to give you the feeling of that, so that you're not totally freaking out constantly. You know. So.
Yeah, because you can. I think that there are sort of certain thresholds or something where before hitting a certain threshold, you're kind of safe looking at this stuff like a doctor kind of studying it.
Right.
And then suddenly there's some sort of sync wave you find yourself in, and suddenly it's not that academic. It's super like visceral and immediate.
Yeah.
At those points,
and personal, but personal in a way that then simultaneously connects you to some cosmic thing.
Yes.
That's where the danger lies, because that's actually something kind of like a little psychotic is happening there, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
You have to know how to let a psychosis happen in a contained sort of way. Hard thing to do.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think the danger is that you can't, and probably you shouldn't, stifle it or prevent it, because there is something very valuable happening there. It's just that it's also very dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so, like, I don't know, I was sort of watching Arrival and getting all this sort of really intense feeling of, especially like, and I'll just say this, like, for the viewers or whatever, that we've been kind of going through a whole other series of films that all kind of constellate in this, well, as films do under sync analysis, that they sort of constellate. And so sometimes you watch a particular film that really kind of highlights that, and you think, okay, I've broken the veil or something. Like, I'm actually sort of, it's easy to jump to a lot of conclusions, but at the same time, I feel like you also should jump to a lot of conclusions in the sense that some conclusion is being repeated. You're being hammered over the head with a certain thing.
Yeah, that's right. The only question is how to interpret it. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
At what level of analysis and obviously about the content, but like, I don't think it's at all useful to deny the. I wish we had a better word for this. It's you know, you've noticed it, whatever it is. It doesn't do any good to question the noticing. Am I allowed to notice it? What does it mean? You know, it's like, well, you've just noticed it, though, whatever it is. So,
yes,
in my opinion, it's usually better to investigate it. But I think you ought to treat it a little bit like, you know, like you've heard a sound that maybe is a wild animal. You don't know what it is, so you should approach it maybe with a little caution.
Yes.
You've noticed a thing, okay, pull on the thread a little bit, but don't yank so hard that you're not ready for the torrent of contents that might pile down on top of you, you know. Unless you really need to yank it super hard and have that kind of like crushing experience, which I think I sort of did need to, actually.
Yeah.
So, you know. But I think the important thing is to acknowledge the seriousness of the reality of whatever it is that you've noticed. And because if you grant it a reality, you know, real things are complicated and unpredictable and therefore not safe. So, yeah.
That is funny, actually, because it's like you're simultaneously taking it seriously, as in you're treating it like a wild animal or something like that.
Right.
And the way in which you take it seriously, like you say, is by being careful, by being cautious.
Right.
And being cautious implies a certain not taking it seriously. In
That's
the sense
right,
of like,
exactly. Yeah. A lightness is also necessary with this.
Yeah.
You also have to be able to just throw it in the garbage when you're done with it, and you know, even if it's something like for me, I'm tracking this weird synchronicity surrounding pairs of red objects and all this stuff that it seems related to 9/11 stuff maybe, but it also seems related to general psychological ideas and also related maybe to some personal things for me. So it's hard to know, where any of that's happening in the end. And if in the end it ends up being some weird little fantasy I had that motivated me to make a lot of cool art, I think you just have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's even preferable, than some of these other strange things we think we see happening here. But
to tell by the fire in the future.
Right.
The good old days.
Yeah.
No,
but I was thinking about that, about the tendency of people and us as well, I guess, to to generalize things that work for us.
Yeah.
It's like maybe it could be the case that as creative artists, we just are a little psychotic. And that's actually what that just means. Like there isn't, I think there's probably some truth to this, right? There isn't so much of a difference between creative genius and creative madness in a certain way. Like, they're close to some line anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, totally. I think that that's definitely something that isn't at all. It's not even starting to be accepted by culture. I think the sort of
no, it's a total no-fly zone.
Yeah. Because on the one hand, and I can understand, on one hand, you always have the danger of like glamorizing mental health issues or whatever, sort of like, Terence McKenna does this sometimes. And I really love Terence McKenna, and I feel that there's a way in which it's good that he was very general with his statements because it allows us to come in and critique him. But there's sometimes, when he's saying things like, a schizophrenic is a shaman. I do agree with that on a certain level, but there is on the one hand, there's that you could sort of glamorize the mental sort of issue, and maybe that will prevent you from handling the suffering that it's causing in a way that works for you. Like if you're having a lot of problems with hearing voices or whatever, and you just fully kind of embrace it because someone told you that it was actually kind of a romantic life path to embrace. I don't know. There's a lot of questions on that.
Yeah, I'm very uncomfortable really when anybody starts talking about schizophrenia in a way that implies that we know what schizophrenia is at all,
Yeah.
A schizophrenic is a shaman is a nice idea, and I think there probably is, like, again, that seems right in some way. But I also think that, this stuff, it's just really not clear what any of this stuff, like, we don't have any kind of a theory of what schizophrenia is really that makes very much sense. Like, to me, that, like, the thing that makes most sense to me is this sort of Jungian perspective on it, that it's more about, like, a balance has been disruptive, where all this unconscious stuff is overwhelming the ego constantly.
Yes.
But that's just another theory. Just another nice idea about whatever this thing is. But yeah, that's sort of what I was like. Let's say that if we're creative people, and that means that whatever that is, the crazy creative thing, like, it might be that we just need to, because it's in our nature, right? We're just going to do a lot better with worldviews that permit that and celebrate it, maybe even, or that somehow teach you how to relate to it, which the Jungian thing is quite good at, I think. It's so hard to imagine. Like, it's just so hard to imagine that other people would have a completely different set of problems. But but maybe they do, and maybe they don't need. I sometimes wonder how. The question is, how similar are we all, really?
Yeah.
And how much can a single medicine work for everyone, and how much does it need to be tailored to the individual? I don't know. Interesting questions.
Yeah.
I do feel like I am generally probably too quick to like not in what I say, because in what I say I'm very careful to put all these abstractions around it or whatever. But in actually how I think about the world, I think that I naturalize the Jungian goggles more than maybe is great, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a byproduct, I suppose, of finding something that really works for you. I like wearing them. The world makes more sense to me. And I feel better about my relationship to it through those goggles. So I like to wear them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like, there is... Because, on the other hand, like you say, there are things that it seems are the same for a lot of people. Like, that if you're thirsty, you drink water, stuff like that. There do seem to be, like, solutions that work for a lot of people. So, it is, I agree, there is... It is an interesting thing to keep in mind that maybe there is something about the Jungian model that that does kind of work, or that at least maybe, you know, that it needs tweaking or something. I don't know. I hate saying that, because one of the things that I find kind of funny about, like, the scientific models of the world is this idea that we understand the universe at like an 80%, but we just need to tweak a few things. Like, you know,
that's such a great attitude. Yeah.
There's something about that I'm like, I laugh about.
Yeah, it's so funny. God.
But at the same time, I seem to take the same attitude when it comes to the inner world instead of the external world. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
But who knows? I mean,
where do I get off having the sense of like having like mastered the terrain or something ridiculous?
But
barely set foot in it, really. I mean, if you take it seriously, it's a cosmos, right?
Yeah.
What's going on in the inner world? Yeah.
So, but at least they're that's okay. So this kind of brings us back to something.
The other side of it is that actually what I observe is people behaving exactly the same way pretty much everywhere. You know, like I don't think there's actually that much variation at all on the basis of what I observe. It's just that what we observe is so determined by our belief system. See, that's the tricky part of it. So I think it's always it's just good hygiene to be a little even obnoxiously kind of self-reflective about this stuff, because it's just so easy to lead yourself into traps. Even when things are very accurate descriptions of reality and working very well, you know. In fact, especially so, because then you're just like, oh, it all works. It all works perfectly. Well, there might be some details that are really important that this particular thing just happens to get wrong for some reason. And because you're not being vigilant at all, you know, they've just slipped past your awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how like this comes up in Arrival, where like they are trying to translate these aliens, and they interpret one of the words as meaning weapon.
Right. Yeah.
When in fact it means tool or some sort of an ability, which is the language itself, and then, you know, misinterpreting that completely, kind of can lead to very different consequences. And it reminds me of what you were saying before about the saving the world thing, and like how what role does sync play in all this, and what role sort of, because okay, just like to organize my thoughts a second. It's sort of like sometimes I feel like we're in an updated version of a different version of what Terence McKenna was talking about when he said that, you know, that everyone that felt able to should take psychedelic mushrooms or whatever,
right?
And that was kind of like that it would heal a lot of. He was more subtle than that. He did say that. I think his more general statement is that art would be the healing thing, that everyone should press the art pedal to the floor and all that. And sometimes in sync work, it does feel like because sync is not a drug, like when it comes to drugs, we understand that it's something a little dangerous.
Right.
I think that culturally we understand that.
Well, it's not a chemical drug, but it's some kind of a weird altered state producing object, you know?
Exactly.
It's some language you can eat that changes your brain in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, so like sometimes because sync doesn't carry the same taboo as drugs do.
Right, yeah.
It's easy and it's happened to me and it continues to happen to me to think that, you know, I can just spam a whole lot of forums on the internet.
Yeah.
Spam them with sync videos and try to blow people's minds. But maybe that's the equivalent of sort of just, feeding mushrooms to people who don't want to. And it's kind of more dangerous because they can't avoid watching the video.
Well, if you pay really close attention to if we can kind of like metacog for a second, if we pay close attention to the conversations you and I have been having over the last month or so, like it is possible to view it as, you know, suddenly we're talking a lot about climate change and this whole Ember's Ghost Squad suicide spree thing, and like, and as we look at those things, or at least as I, you know, as I'm obsessing about those things and maybe inflicting some of them onto you or whatever, like, it's like taking, you know, the gravity of this stuff is getting more and more intense. It's almost like, you know, are we sort of attempting to radicalize ourselves in some way by raising these imaginary stakes of it's really important to spread this sync thing because of these reasons? And what are the reasons? Well, some huge problem that's a problem everywhere that we have no idea what the solution to it is. I mean, climate change. Who knows how that's going to be fixed? Maybe sync is a part of that. I sort of think it will be, but we don't at all know that, right? So that's like way premature to draw that kind of connection. Then the other thing is similar. You know, it's. I think it's.
Yeah.
The thing is well, you know, it's so tricky with this stuff though, because I'm quite happy to let that happen. You know what I mean? Like, because I feel that I'm experienced enough with this stuff to contain it in the end. You know, I'm just opening an experimental zone where I get to think about sync in absolutely apocalyptic, world-ending terms, and I'm, you know, some weird magician hero in that story. You know, it's a myth, obviously. Yeah. So I don't take it too literally, you know. But I also don't dismiss it because I think it's symbolic of something real. It's just hard to say what that is. Maybe ever. Yeah.
I love the idea about radicalizing yourself or something. It does seem like actually a lot of my recent dreams seem to have been about this. Like, I feel like a lot of my recent dreams have been about musicians who take their music very seriously. That's been like
right.
I've been dreaming out a lot of musicians who aren't me, but obviously serve like an ego function. And it's as if my dreams are a way in which I am motivating myself unconsciously to make music after a long period of being kind of unmotivated about it. And it's almost as if, and this may be kind of a weird reading, but it's almost as if the apocalyptic thinking is a way to motivate you to do what you believe you have to do or something.
Yeah, exactly. I have the same kind of sense with it. It's as if I'm tricking myself into taking my art seriously enough to make it excellent. You know?
Right. It's funny when you think about it.
I just need to let go and make excellent art and stop putting so many boxes around it, you know? And so, yeah, but I'm so timid with it, I think, that all this urgency and stuff, so it is, for me personally, it's a compensating thing that I needed or maybe continue to need, right? But here's the question. just because it's that doesn't mean it isn't also true, and maybe
Exactly.
also true in a literal way. Like, yeah, that's not
Totally.
off the table. And there are lots of things that it seems to suggest that that's true, you know? So you have to also take that seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, in a sense, it's like, I mean, you're sort of motivating yourself with something completely real. It's like if you're sort of heading towards a precipice, that's a good motivation to do something about it, because you actually are heading towards a precipice.
Right.
Like, but at the same time, it serves this sort of like Terence McKenna has a thing about this as well, how he felt that there was a paradox, that there was nothing really to be afraid of, because he sort of felt that everything was heading in the direction that was divine in his view.
Right.
But that at the same time, this was not an excuse to sit around waiting for heaven to arrive. That somehow it was like those two areas coexisted, even though it seemed paradoxical. You had to fight for like political rights or like for social change, climate change. You actually did have to do all that, even though it was going to work out. Or like there's a weird sort of like snake biting its tail thing. You're motivating yourself to do something that, I don't know.
Yeah. It's that thing of that one's hard. That one's hard to keep in my brain for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that exactly, but
yeah.
But sometimes there are sort of like magical experiences, sync experiences, or whatever, psychedelic experiences that do seem to really show a picture of the world as being everything's all right kind of thing. It's like a classic Zen thing.
Right, like, totally.
You're in this meditative state. You end into this meditative state, and you realize that everything that you were afraid about wasn't worthy of being afraid about. And yet, when you return, is a sort of bodhisattva thing. When you return back into the world of Maya, you still have to take it seriously, even though you know that it's an illusion. There's this sort of weird duality in the Buddhist model.
Yeah, I think my problem is that I kind of keep thinking I'm going to find some way to explain that to myself intellectually that's going to make sense. But it's just irrational. It doesn't make sense. Like it somehow feels related to the things we've been talking about like the like meta-ethical aspect to divinity, right? That
yes, yeah.
It's like, somehow exactly that problem, just a little shifted around or something.
Like the Abraxas thing. You mean.
Abraxas, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Right. There's just a weird thing that comes with becoming aware of first of all, of your own dark side, and accepting it somehow. That changes your relation to the ethical landscape in a way that is very hard to articulate, but there's very clearly a shift, I think, because it's not as simple as relativizing good and evil. It's not that, although that maybe is involved in it somehow. This is how unclear this is to me. I can't even say those basic things about it with any degree of confidence. But it's. I have been I'm currently feeling more like an earthling, right? But I've been in states sometimes for like long periods of time, like several days at a time or something. Not just a flashing flash, but a sustained state where I just feel I feel that everything that happens is perfect. No matter how horrible it is, and I have no discrimination about it. Like I apply it as much to my own pain and regrets in life and etc. as I do to everything else in the world. It's all just what it has to be, and it's part of a perfect story, and stories need light and dark, or they're just not interesting, right?
Yeah.
So Jung talks about abraxas in terms of effectivity. I think it's more almost about interest or attention. I don't know. Somehow that's all related. But so okay, there's that, but you can't live according to that. And that's the thing, is that when I was in those states, I didn't do anything. Really, I really did nothing. I sat, it was meditative, but a weird kind of. I felt very sick actually by the end of that. I felt, and I mean physically, like I felt it was something nauseating about it. Eventually, it didn't start off that way, but I just felt like I had died. I think there were feelings a little bit of like being a corpse kind of attached to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's a very intense feeling of death on it, because I think it's not a mortal perspective, is it?
No.
It's a chess master perspective, looking down at the field of opposites from the top of the mountain. And well, how amazing that human beings can climb to the top of that mountain, even for a brief moment, But something about the air up there isn't breathable, it seems. No. You need to come back down, not even necessarily to return to the village. Maybe that's your bag, maybe it isn't. But you just need to make decisions at some point, or you are going to die. That's the thing. It's a matter of survival. The ego has to take the decisions. And as soon as you do that, I think you're back in an ethical space. And so that's the other thing about it. It doesn't solve any problems. It doesn't. It's not any kind of an answer to any ethical problem.
No, exactly.
It's a weird context, a secret context that surrounds ethics that it almost seems like no one is supposed to really ever see. It's like you're peering into a glitched, like it's not clear what you're even seeing when you peer into that space. You're seeing something that definitely implies, wow, this whole ego decision thing is not exactly what it appears somehow, But
no, there is a big
not that it's hard to say, obviously. Yeah.
You're right. There is like a dissociative thing about that you're suddenly like looking at your own body from above or something.
Exactly.
And like I agree that how do I say this? It's funny because exactly it's not the solution to any problem. And yet,
it is.
It gets.
It's the solution to every problem in some strange way. Like holding in mind the fact that context exists sucks a lot of the attachment out of the decision-making process, which is good, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, or it gets presented. It easily gets presented as a solution, because there's something so alluring or
right.
I agree that I think it is important to like maybe open up to the possibility that is that there is something kind of deathly or not.
I think it's a very common problem, really, like in Western kind of Enlightenment-oriented subcultures. There's such an emphasis on achieving bliss or nirvana, or getting to this peak where all your problems are instantly solved. And I don't know, my experience of this stuff has not been like that at all. It's just, I'm solving problems, but new problems occur in the act of acquiring the skill set necessary to solve the problems you had when you started. So I just don't know if I buy the idea of escaping the wheel fundamentally. I'm not sure, but yeah.
No, exactly. I think that's, I agree. I really like what you say about the ego and decisions, because I've been thinking that the ego is decisions kind of thing.
Right. It seems somehow like that. Yeah.
That you I mean, that's what free will is in a sense, right? You decide to go here or to go there. And it seems as if that's what the ego is in a sense. Like you're not just like looking at a screen and seeing yourself walking down the street. Like you are walking down the street and you are deciding to take this route or that one or whatever.
Actually, I have a question for you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no.
Oh, I'm curious what you think about the ego, because to me, the ego seems almost like this perfect null pocket. You know, I find it very difficult to think about what it is, or to even locate it in my experience. Do you know what I mean? Because it is me, the experiencer, somehow, or that's how it appears in my experience. It appears in my experience like almost precisely as an absence. It's funny because the unconscious is supposed to be this alien thing you can never touch. Yes, but it is encounterable in the imaginative arena. It seems like the ego isn't exactly. Because you are still the ego in those experiences generally.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Where's the vantage point? You know, you can let it. And then it seems like really you become aware of your ego as ego after you've suffered a serious ego death. But exactly, it's gone then again. So it's like you never get to really look at it.
Yeah, and even like I would say that. So one model that I like is to see the ego as a fractal, in that even when you have an ego death experience, you are still experiencing that somehow. It's just that it's almost like it's a different register of ego or something.
Right.
Like I remember in psychedelic experiences and in like intense meditation experiences, this feeling of precisely this feeling that decisions and decision making had somehow stopped meaning what it usually meant. Like I was just watching myself as if it was a movie kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So I was sitting in this seat of pure sort of awareness of whatever, just looking at it. But the thing is that even though the person who is sitting in the seat of awareness of whatever is very, very still and is not doing anything, they're still a person. I feel like it's still an ego.
Right.
And it's just an ego that's just looking at stuff instead of doing stuff. Something, what did I say?
Yeah. Like, right.
And that maybe, if we were to go into slightly more spiritual areas, that maybe it isn't exactly your ego. Like maybe you're somehow, like if it's like this giant puppet guy or whatever who's sort of controlling you or whatever, that kind of model. And suddenly some experience kind of makes you realize that you're also the puppet guy. Holding you. I feel also like this could go on forever. Personally, I have a fractal feeling about this, that the puppet guy is also a puppet in someone else's hand or whatever.
Yeah. Puppet guy's all the way down. Yeah.
And that you can, so you never, it's almost as if maybe there is never ego death. There is just like a sort of a zooming in and out of the fractal or something. I'm not sure what I think about that exactly. It's very sort of the first thing that comes into my mind at the moment.
I do feel like in general, we probably need more. It's always a question, isn't it? I was about to say we need more precise terms for talking about ego death. It seems like there are many kinds of ego deaths and degrees and levels of meaning that they carry with them and so on. But then it's also very easy to blind yourself with an overly precise taxonomy that you haven't earned, when it just, the situation is murky. It doesn't help to pretend like you know what's going on with. That's kind of what Heidegger ends up doing. He just divides his words finer and finer distinctions, but it never really helps him approach the problem.
Nice. I love that about you're right. It's something that you haven't earned. You haven't earned that new term. That's funny. Yeah, you're right. Something kind of yeah. No, and I know it's funny because let's see. I mean, talking about ego death and all that, like to return to the let's say the everything is all right kind of view of the world, that everything is perfect, and that yes, I agree. There's something very weird going on with that, because at the end of the day, you take decisions, and even decisions that seem completely non-ethical, like now I'm deciding to lift my hand up, or whatever. Like I have decided that it was my will to do that, in a sense.
Right.
And so in a way, that was...
Although interestingly, there's some evidence to suggest that you decide that after you've already carried out the action.
Right.
There's so strange, but there's been some measurements done, I guess, that the lower autonomic systems are already preparing to move the arm before you've consciously registered the desire, even the thought to move it.
Right.
It already originates in a deeper unconscious. So that really starts to ask a weird question, doesn't it, about how much the ego is even doing ever. Is it actually making decisions, or does it just convince itself that it's making them in order to feel okay about what's happening? And actually what it is just a completely passive observer. You're a camera recording this experiment for the archons or whatever. I don't know.
No, yeah, no, I know what you mean. And like, I suppose the way I would approach that initially is that, so on the one hand, this obviously I'm getting into very speculative territory, but I feel as if
that should be the name of the podcast, dude. Speculative territory.
Maybe it's a bold kind of claim, but I feel that if I am not making the decision, is something making the decision?
Right.
Can we personalize the decision in some way? Is
it's
some
so hard
kind of ego?
Everything we think we understand about anything is in such a state of fractured disconnection. You can't think in any direction without breaking some whole other useful thing. Like in this case, like the whole Darwinian framework is kind of broken if there isn't something making real decisions. That's the whole thing. It's a game where things are trying to anticipate and outmaneuver and compete. There has to be,
Yeah.
It's also very hard to reconcile any of this with the fact that things change. If things are in a state of perfection, why does anything happen? There's just very fundamental ontological questions about this stuff, I think, that nobody has any answers to at all. Like,
yeah, no, I tend to like. I like seeing it at a. Exactly, if you zoom it down to a slightly more human-sized scale, for example.
Yeah.
There is this thing where, I don't know, there are clear kind of moments when there are good and evil situations.
That's the thing, yeah. How can it's so clear? How can it be that it can be so clear and so clear intuitively? That's also interesting,
Yeah, like I don't know. It's hard to come up with good examples for this, but maybe just the glass of water thing, that if you're thirsty and, drinking a glass of water, you have the decision to drink a glass of water or a glass of sand or whatever. It seems sort of very obvious that the glass of the water, is, let's say, what you want or whatever. I don't know. There's a lot of kind of things I'm taking for granted there, but let's say, and that's a kind of a convoluted example. It's something more normal, like I don't know, you feel that you hurt a friend and you feel that you should apologize to them. Something social, something kind of like in the phenomenological kind of.
That's a good example. Yeah, I like that.
And you feel that you should apologize to them, and you go and you do it, and you feel better, and you talk with your friend or whatever. So you feel that you took the right decision there or whatever. That somehow when you look at Sync, and Sync can lead you exactly into these really absolute big bird's eye views of things, of everything is good and everything is evil at the same time or whatever, and
right,
and that those kind of absolute views sometimes can interfere with the medium-sized events, like apologizing to a friend. And I suppose that's what happens with inflation. I suppose that if you personally identify with some sort of some kind of beyond good and evil thing, you identify with that, it'll change how you relate to the world. Like you said, like maybe you'll just stay indoors meditating all the time or whatever. And it's hard to tell.
Or maybe you'll decide to just blindly pursue like horrible murderous desires or something, because why not? It's all perfect. I'm gonna be part of the dark divine or whatever, How do you make that decision, right? This stuff is just very weird, murky.
And like the thing about God, good and evil. Okay, yeah, I've completely lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
That's a shame. Oh yes, I know. Yeah, it's a thing about egos within egos. That's, okay, so let's take the example of I lift my arm up.
Fractal topics are one of my favorite genres of topic, by the way, so I'm very into that.
Cool, because exactly, if I lift my arm up, but let's say that there is a certain way in which I get presented this feeling.
Yes.
I experience this feeling that I took a decision or whatever.
Right.
That I still feel, and again, I think this is at this point in the conversation.
There's actually a name for this in philosophy of mind. It's called the homunculus problem. And it's eliminated by people like Daniel Dennett precisely on the grounds of its fractality. It creates an infinite loop, and that can't happen. So it's not a good explanation of consciousness. But it seems to be that that just is what we're dealing with. I find the homunculus, the idea of a little guy inside of the head watching a screen, that seems almost inevitable to me. That at some level something like that is actually happening.
Right, that's very interesting. Yeah, about Dennett. Yeah,
Dennett. Interesting case.
Because you're right. I mean,
can we diagnose Daniel Dennett? Is that an appropriate topic for a future episode?
Well, I don't know much about him. I've seen like one TED talk.
I don't either, really. I don't really either.
but
he's just a caricature in my mind of representing a particular approach to philosophy of mind, I think.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was this YouTuber who was talking about him, saying that well, it was actually Matthew Segal, anyway, just in case someone wants to look him up, who was talking about how Dennett and Dawkins, they both reach similar conclusions about information or memes.
Memes, right.
So it's almost like an extreme materialist worldview leads them to something supremely non-material.
That's right. One step away from archetypes, actually. That's quite a good point that Jordan Peterson makes, I think. Is that a meme is really a shallower idea of an archetype.
Interest. Yeah.
It's like it's a more rapid cycle thought form. It just, it's it lives and dies a lot faster, the meme. So it evolves a lot faster. But then it's like maybe the ones that succeed in that fast evolution, those become more archetypal as the patterns cement as it goes forward. Maybe something like that. Although it's not. The other thing to say about all that too is that we have no idea what an archetype is or what any of that means. This notion that they're involved in kind of cemented patterns through some kind of ancestral memory or something is just one particular idea about them.
Good point.
That I guess maybe Jung thinks sometimes, although he seems to hold different opinions about them, depending a little bit on who he's talking to.
Good point. Yeah, that's also like a story about archetypes.
Right.
It's funny because like I think my desire for like alchemical symmetry is making me want to say something now, which is that there is also this opposite path where, let's say, materialism seems to lead itself to this idea of memes or whatever, right?
Right.
But idealism or extreme like views where you say that everything is a dream or everything is spiritual.
Yeah.
It seems to me that they lead, and I identify with this in a way, that they lead to a certain animism.
Yes.
Kind of like with object-oriented ontology or something, where specific beings, like my computer keyboard and my cup and my microphone, have their own sort of it's kind of like the homunculus thing, that suddenly things exist again, material things almost, in the sense that they have a solid constitution.
Exactly. Exactly.
They stop being so ethereal. They persist through time.
They're real, and that means that there's some. It's that part of our sense of reality includes materiality. It's more real if it's material. So the more real that you grant to the symbol, in a strange way, the more material the symbol is becoming. But that's also, there's another way to look at that, though, right? Which is that the symbol just does grow out of nature, so it is material.
Yeah.
Although, right, hard to sort out whether or not that's an accurate view of what a symbol is, or whether that's not itself a strange projection onto the symbol that to naturalize it in some way for some reason that remains dark to us, maybe. Don't know.
Yeah, no, it's, I suppose, like the only thing that comes to mind right now is that this idea of the homunculus, if it has something to do with how we conceptualize choice, like I make a choice or something, some agent makes a choice or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm kind of, in my mind, I'm tying it into these kind of new agey ideas of like, well, or occult ideas of the higher self or whatever, or things like that.
Yeah.
That, or like in Jung's, I really like, there's some kind of quote about Jung, how he starts to theorize about there being many egos in the psyche. It's just that only one of them is conscious, or we identify with one of them, but that actually we are a big soup of people.
that makes sense to me.
And maybe
Have you seen
people.
Split, by the way? Sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, sorry.
Split, the M. Night Shyamalan thing about split personalities.
Oh no, I haven't. No.
It's almost like 100% weird ego fears about this, I think.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting. But that's I think that's what bothers people about the split personality idea so much, anyways. That the fact that that's possible ever implies some things about the way we're all put together, right?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly. It kind of,
I think
it
that's
disturbs
a freaky
us.
zone for people. You know, that when the machine breaks, you learn things about it, and so people who are crazy, you know, are.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite a thing, that I think.
That's funny because I was wondering about how like in this Jung idea of there being many egos, one way to visualize it is that there are many egos sitting side by side and they exist at the same level of fractality, let's say. But it also could be that it goes both sideways and upwards, kind of thing, that there are many egos in the sense that maybe me and two other of my egos are encapsulated in a bigger ego, and so on. Like a sort of kind of three-dimensionally fractal kind of.
Well, that's interesting. Well, I was also I just had a vision of egos in little pods, but they're pods organized in time. So it's like past egos being stored so that you can revert to them maybe in a crisis. It's like backups. You know, desktop backups, yeah.
Well,
and then maybe it extends into the future as well with imagined egos. Possible configurations that are pre-prepared by the unconscious in some way, perhaps, so that they can suddenly go live when time requires it. I don't know. Speculating, random speculation here about the structure of the psyche in a big way, but
no, I mean, yeah, it's. I think that the weird thing is that this, of course, brings us back to precog in a way. That
yes, everything leads back to precog.
Because, like, one of the kind of fucked up things about like sync and all this stuff is that exactly it does, at least to me, it leads me to take seriously the imagination, as Terence McKenna said, or sort of that a story, let's say a story being told in a movie, is somehow very real, very personal, very collective, everything kind of at the same time. And so that when you're remembering something, this is maybe off topic a little bit, but if you're remembering something, remembering yourself 10 years ago doing something, you're seeing it in your mind's eye like a movie kind of thing. And you're seeing, your current ego is seeing a different person doing something. But at the same time, in the act of remembering, it's also like you're wearing these virtual reality goggles and you're identifying with that past ego.
Yeah.
There is a really weird way in which an ego can both look at a past ego and identify with it, as it, and let's say in the case of precognition, you can seize a future ego of yourself as if it were a different person, but also identify with that. Mm-hmm. There's a weird way in which I mean, I think this is where the topic begins getting, and this is what Arrival kind of sparked in me, that the topic begins to be so weird that you have to simultaneously be even more cautious than usual.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, there is like an Indiana Jones thing of like adventure. It feels like I've discovered a new, a secret temple, a new cave.
Totally, I'm really feeling that as well. Actually, I'm wearing green today spontaneously. I feel that we're fools again here because,
right? Yeah.
I've spent the last several years looking at this 9/11 sync stuff, and in a way that's been quite easy. It's funny to say that now, but because you have the thing you're comparing against, this event happened, and then you're asking a question: are there precognitive echoes of this that I can find? And it looks like maybe the answer is yeah, you can find. Of course, we don't know what they are in the end, but yeah, you can find things that look like precognitive reflections of that event. Once you know what the event is, now what I'm playing out a little bit is trying to see if I can look at current films and, on the basis of how they interlock, at a raw kind of pattern analysis level, try to make a prediction about something in the future. That's a very different scenario, I think.
Yeah.
It's a divinatory thing now.
Yes.
And Yeah, I don't feel at all that I have any idea what that's about, actually, or what it means to court that, even to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do this cosmic thing. I'm going to I'm going to leech my sync tentacles into all this current media and just feel for correspondences, and then on the basis of that, let something happen. Because we don't actually know at all what any of this means in the end, but because autonomous entity encounter seems to be on the menu, it strikes me that's, who knows what's gonna, something might possess you that who knows what it is, and it and maybe it's just gonna play a joke, and it's just nonsense, or maybe it's something more sinister, I don't know. Not to not to go immediately to my black nail polish version of Sync or whatever, but I do that's part of the thing. What happens to the fool? He falls off a cliff, right? Presumably it bangs you up a little bit. So there's, I don't know, there's that aspect to it. You're stumbling around blindly, you're going to bump into some things that might injure you. I don't know. There's definitely a danger to it. But that's what makes it actually, it's actually not a fantasy. That's the funny thing. It's a real adventure. Because there are real stakes to it, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of my biggest questions with that, I think, is that if you, let's say I'm going to bring it down to the level of personal psychoanalysis, let's say. Because maybe a person can have, through this kind of art sync kind of research, get the intuition, this precognitive intuition that something's going to happen. Now, the thing that seems to happen, I think, it's weird because, okay, I'm going to divide it into two types of precog at the moment.
I have paper in front of me. I'm actually going to write this out. All right. Two types. Type 1 and type 2.
Yeah. Well, because it's just that the classic division is that it's just that there seem to be, let's say, precognitive dreams that just happen. It seems as if you don't get the feeling that you could have avoided them almost, which is kind of an eerie feeling.
Yeah.
And sometimes
are those the same or are those separate? I wonder. Like a spontaneous dream versus a fated one. Those are almost opposites. Yet somehow these dreams seem to carry both feelings. Yeah. No.
Well,
it just happens. So there's a spontaneous aspect to it, but then when it happens, it's that future orientation of it that makes it impossible to think about, I guess. Sorry, continue.
No, exactly. I think it's the future orientation of dreams that simultaneously it gives it.
Right. Yeah.
It opens up the possibility, as personal experience shows, for, let's say, paranormal stuff to happen. That is to say, actual precognitive dreams where you dream that you're walking down the street and a piano falls from some guy is moving a piano and it falls or whatever, and then you find yourself in that situation, you get a deja vu and it happens, and you say, okay, that's what I dreamt about, here it is, here it's happened or whatever. But then at the same time, if dreams are future oriented in the sense that they're mapping out the direction in which, let's say, at a more secular level, at a less paranormal level, the more accepted view of your dream is kind of mapping out where you're headed, in the sense that if you're living very recklessly or whatever, maybe you're having dreams that you're kind of dying from overdose or whatever, having those kinds of dreams.
Right.
That those dreams, that they could be premonitory in the sense that could happen, but at the same time, there is a feeling that you could change it.
Interesting.
That the dream is warning you, like you're taking too many drugs or you're eating too much.
So you find that to be a persistent association, the feeling of changeability. I only ask because I don't have very much experience with precognitive dreams. You're really some kind of a savant in that in that area, I think. Is that a thing that's typical?
Well, I think that's just what confuses me about it is that exactly this thing that keeping a dream journal or whatever. I get the feeling that it becomes very difficult to identify. Like sometimes I want to think that precognitive dreams are like special mushrooms, sort of special kind of dreams that emerge.
Yeah.
But sometimes I get the feeling that dreaming is inherently precognitive. It's just that there are many things that we avoid or that we prevent from happening, or many things that are precognitive in such an abstract, symbolic way that you wouldn't have even picked up. And then there are those dreams that hit that sort of pitch of like human. They say it at a human level, at a not too abstract and not too simple kind of thing.
Right.
But I'm wondering again, and I'm wondering how much, whether there are two types of precognitive dreams, whether some you can prevent, some you can't. I don't know. It's just the free will versus determinism thing.
Right.
I don't know, but and my position in that is just an alchemical one on the face of it. I suppose it's a naive kind of position, but just that I think it is both free will and determinism. It's just
right. That's fine. That's basically all I can say. Like, what else can you say about it? Exactly.
And yet it's as if questions do remain about how do you relate, because like what you were saying, do we try to predict future things in order to change them, or is the act of making art itself is the act of predicting something?
I'm reminded of that little Ghostbusters thing that if you see something, say something. It seems like what's the obviously a message is transmitted for some reason. It's probably not just to be perceived. I don't know. Yeah.
And like you've said sometimes as well, that we do get the feeling that the anima or different kind of personified aspects of the psyche get angry when you don't say it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's funny how it changes register like that. Sometimes it's extremely impersonal and just like you're just receiving data. And sometimes you're being scolded.
What is going on? It's just... Yeah. Well, I think, maybe it is an issue of kind of... Sometimes the unconscious doesn't have an active agenda. It's not, And in those instances, the dream world is just maybe a relatively random and sort of... I mean, not random in terms of the material, but random in terms of where you end up in the psyche, if you know what I mean. Like, it's just like, shove the ego somewhere while we're busy. The anima and the self and the shadow, they're all working on something, and they don't have time to fuss over you, but you've entered their realm now. So they make something for you, they do the best they can, and then they go back to their real work, And in those kinds of dreams, it's like you're just getting a little window into the operation of the psyche in some way, in a kind of low-level way. Like, you're just like, I don't know, like observing arbitrary dynamics of your unconscious, I guess, in some way. And then at other points, like, they've prepared the project. I have that sense, big dreams. It's like, wow, that must have been in the works for a while. It's like, it's like a movie has been made for you. It's like, wow, this one's really good. It like it had such care in the. I love the scenery, and I love like some of these dreams can be so incredible. I don't think that they're just I think that they're made somehow. So I think it's almost like these forces are preparing the dreams, and maybe that's part of the distinction. I don't know.
Man, I love that. I love the idea of dreams being prepared. You're right.
It just seems that way to me. Like
there is almost like I'm relating it to libido or something now. That it's almost as if to reach orgasm, that there is a build-up kind of thing. Like it's almost as if there is maybe you have a dream on the the 4th of December, whatever, and it's been cooking since the 1st of December. It's almost like the libido has been sort of stimulated, or sort of something. It's been taking shape, but at the same time, you dreamt something on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of December.
Right.
It's like there are different like
well, that's the other thing too, is
work groups or something.
Yeah, it seems like the unconscious has a real penchant for like spin-offs and like crossovers and like sequels, and it's everything is a series and everything relates to everything else, and it's all like maximally like stitched up, seems like. Because Jung felt that you couldn't really analyze a single dream in a certain way, because the meaning of that dream is embedded in a whole series of dreams and a whole period of your life where long form patterns are playing out. And I guess maybe that's the other part of it too, is that those dreams that are being prepared, that take a long time to be prepared, have had longer to crunch on subtle patterns in the environment that maybe allow the dream to extrapolate further into the future, taking a purely local, linear view of how this might be working.
Yes. Yeah. They've crunched more data, more variables in the analysis in the weather analysis of what's going to happen.
Yeah. It was a deep compute, that one. We're making a really deep guess for some reason. Either that's because we're trying to guess really far out into the future, or it's because the data is so thin and ambiguous, even for a prediction in the immediate future. But in either case, a whole lot of libido, unconscious energy expenditure had to have gone into it. Yeah,
that's funny because I think you just hit on something I really like about series, like TV shows, and like the unconscious is to that, because I get the feeling that the way that TV shows have become bigger than movies in recent years. It's almost as if people are now being forced by the unconscious to see connections between different pieces of media.
I know, it's so hysterical.
In the sense that, like, sort of people don't generally watch a movie and then they watch another unrelated movie and think that second unrelated movie is episode 2 of a series. But a synchead does that in a sense. Like I watched Ghostbusters and then I watched Arrival, and they feel connected.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's almost like TV shows are a way of like forcing that on people in a sense, because you have to watch different hour-long pieces of media, so they're almost as long as a movie. Yeah. And the first episode is connected to the second one. Like you have to continually tie.
It's almost as if people just have a deep need to relate to story in that way.
Yeah.
And we're not getting it from a Bible now.
Exactly.
So there is a big void. And pop culture is just kind of rushed in to fill it, because it's just like a market dynamic thing almost. People respond to it. They want more of it. So we'll make more of it. And so what's happening is this massive modern mythology is being assembled, in the process of being built right now. I find that so weird to think about. I wonder if isn't much longer ranging consequences to this American Hollywood superhero movie project than we think. Are we really watching the emergence of new God images that are going to stick for a while? You know?
Yes.
Or are we entering a kind of McKenna-like novelty explosion where precisely the point is it's all the ghosts exploding out of the containment grid? It's going to be an infinite proliferation of God images that you can't even, couldn't even imagine from the current situation. Who knows?
Yeah.
Or none of those, because the whole concept of a God image is some weird nonsense that this Swiss guy made up. Who knows?
No, but I mean, I love that. And I do think that, I mean, you could already see it, and like people in the kitchen sink sort of constantly noting this, that there are, let's say, secular examples of sync appreciation, of people on Twitter, for example, saying, hey, did you notice that the actor who plays this guy in Star Wars also did this? And it's like almost like people are starting to get into that kind of thing.
Totally. It really seems like all these like
and they can't avoid
orbiting features of sync are just growing in the culture generally. Yeah, it does seem that way.
Because it's like after a sufficiently high dose of media, and maybe, because maybe it's...
I love that sentence, a sufficiently high dose of media.
like maybe it seems to us like a long time has gone by, like that we've been watching movies for a long time, but we haven't really. No, it's so new. God, it's terrifying. I mean, just the idea of a display in this way, this supercharged kind of a display. I mean, obviously displays go back, shadow puppets on the cave walls. Yeah.
And the face is a display, and who knows, you can trace back a long way. But this is a different thing now. Yeah, it's very, very new. I think that's what 2001 is about, probably in large measure. Just the evolutionary impact of the display. Something happened when we made cinema, moving picture displays. Something new has opened up there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem maybe, and I'm kind of hitting on the same metaphor again, but like a dosage thing, like McKenna says, like there is sort of like you can take DMT, you can smoke one kind of hit of DMT and not reach that kind of weird place that he says.
Right.
But then
sync dosage is such an amusing concept. I'm just imagining like a future where there's a clinic and you're trying to figure out the patient's like how many grams of sync.
How many movies did you watch?
Yeah, exactly. And at what speed? I feel that the slower the motion, the higher the dose when it comes to.
Yeah. It's funny because I want to return a second to something you said before about the ego gets kind of taken through the dream, and sometimes it enters a certain realm and sometimes it doesn't. Like that, I really like this idea of a space, a three-dimensional, but like the idea of moving through space.
Yeah.
In the dream world, but in a way maybe that is obviously different from physical space, but still that has some spatiality to it. In that, like Terence McKenna says for the DMT thing, that you do get the feeling, and like with mushrooms, I got the same feeling as well, that you enter into different rooms, into different kind of places.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can return to those same rooms.
Yes.
So it's almost as like there is like a location in space, but the location in space is connected to like your emotions and how you're feeling. It's like almost like going into a specific vibe, a specific feeling takes you, like, I don't know, there's something interesting about how the DMT elves in McKenna's myth are the ones who create the bejeweled kind of toys, which would be the dreams or whatever. And in the sense of like, I'm really stringing a lot of stuff here, but Arrival, for example, or Ghostbusters, all this thing about the entities from the other side kind of getting in touch to give something. I have this feeling that you have to sort of go to a specific place to do that.
Yes,
I'm not sure where I want to. I don't know where I want to get.
Well, it's very interesting thinking about. I'm just going to drop in something I don't really fully understand, but I understand a bit of. Just a cybernetics thing, which is the way that you describe the possibilities inherent in a system is as a space. It's called the phase space, and you can visualize it in a little three-dimensional graph, or n-dimensional graph, whatever you're working in. But and it's just I think that it seems like spatial metaphor is just so deeply fundamental to our entire cognitive style as human beings. Like, you just can't ever really escape from it. And obviously, everything that happens in dreams happens spatially. It's a spatial visual thing that there isn't in terms of the content that's coming through. It's it's the same as waking experience, which is the same way. So it just seems like a very basic, inescapable. Now I should say too with that statements like that, are kind of like somewhat tricky to make, right? Because it could be that I just haven't experienced some state of consciousness that would show me that it is possible to think outside of spatial metaphors.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, you're right.
Which we're both, I think, like fairly seasoned sort of phenomenologists or something at this point. So you can't take for granted at a certain point this stuff anymore, because it's like we've just had the experience so many times, I think, of not being aware of some aspect of our subjectivity that then at some point crashed into awareness. So there's always that possibility still.
Yeah.
I don't. You never get to escape from that, unfortunately. I think that's just like a fundamental, like, infinite uncertainty in the human condition.
Yeah, it's funny because precisely, I think, like 2 nights ago or something, I had a dream that reminded me of Philip K. Dick a bit. A dream where there was no spatiality, actually.
Oh wow, you did it!
Like. And I mean, of course, again, with dreams, it's tricky because it's just hard to know whether you're just not remembering the whole picture or whatever. But
was it not visual at all?
Well, just this feeling of like information being conveyed.
Interesting.
Just it's hard to say. And of course, as I say, a very likely explanation is simply that I don't remember the visuals, that I just remember the information or whatever. But I do.
Right, the memory thing, yeah.
But I did have it, like Philip K. Dick talks about this as well in his exegesis of dreams, where it feels as if he's just like feeling or thinking stuff in a non.
That's so interesting. I think I know what you guys mean, maybe, but for me, they're always still spatial and visual. But I think that's because of a problem in my brain, actually. What I mean is, I have dreams where I'm solving some kind of problem very abstractly, and it's not an action. I'm not in an environment, and there's not anything like that. But I'm seeing 2-dimensional symbols and geometric things happening while that's happening.
Yes.
And so it's all visually, spatially tethered still in some way for me. But I'm synesthetic. I see sound as shapes and colors and things, and all my thinking is very visual. So I think that might be actually like a weird short circuit I have going on.
Well, actually, it's funny. Now that you mentioned that, I am starting to remember actually that yeah, you're right. I think I was also just seeing like the information sort of like written on a two-dimensional kind of space.
It's extremely 2D. I find those kinds of dreams very strange. There's something quite claustrophobic about them. I feel a little suffocated by them typically when they're happening. It's as if I'm barely aware of a process that wasn't really designed to be in my awareness. It's not a dream, actually. It's some weird low-level problem-solving behavior that the unconscious is doing, and I'm just peering into it accidentally. And I don't really like it very much.
It's funny. I really like, though, what you said before about systems theory.
Phase spaces, yeah.
That, because really, when you think about like the homunculus thing, that we, or this sort of animism thing, or that you get this feeling that there are objects, there is me, and in a sense, objects. Maybe I'm jumping to a conclusion, but they kind of imply space in a way.
Yeah, I think so.
Because you are, like, the homunculus is somewhere, or at least is limited by something that isn't itself, kind of thing. Like oxygen or whatever. Sort of space. Maybe not. Like, but I feel like exactly that maybe at realms that we usually don't think are spatial, like the dream space or stuff like that, it's easy to see it as a two-dimensional screen where three-dimensional images are being projected, kind of thing. But maybe the three-dimensionality of dreams maybe has more reality to it than it seems. But I don't know, it's something strange about that.
Do you have recurrent locations and things in your dreams?
Well,
do you have the sense of visiting the same, say, houses or dream cities or weird things like that, or are they more kind of just randomly set?
No, it's funny because like, for me, dreams were what got me into sync, or what got me into a sync mindset.
Right.
Precisely because there were and continue to be recurring locations. It's just that in each dream, or in each scene of the dream, they are presented in a different way. In the same way that, for example, in Suicide Squad and Ghostbusters, there is the idea of a machine that opens up a portal.
Right.
But it's a different machine in every movie. But it's still the same machine, kind of thing.
Right.
At an archetypal level or whatever. Like, I remember having a lot of dreams where I was in a hospital, and it was always a completely different hospital, but it was always the hospital. Kind of
right.
It's like the Jungian kind of analysis thing. That it forces you to notice the patterns, force you to see an abstraction of those specific instances or something, so that there is a recurring location. It's just that it changes shape, it shape shifts or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
That's very interesting. That reminds. Sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent, I guess, but it reminds me of a conversation I was having with somebody on the Jung subreddit about there's this whole weird thing about what Jung thought about yoga and Eastern philosophy, I guess, generally speaking, as it applied to the West. Because Jung was really of the opinion that Westerners probably shouldn't practice yoga, right? He makes remarks directly to that effect in some places. And it seems somehow related because it's like, it's funny to me that Jung would say that, because it seems to me that archetypal theory really undercuts that attitude. Because isn't it precisely the idea that these symbols are all kind of interchangeable to some degree? They're, like take the yin yang and the Ouroboros, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, they're quite different. We could discuss the ways in which they're different. They emphasize different aspects of this psychological transformation thing or opposite relation thing. But they're clearly getting at the same idea, and it's hardly as if you can't figure it out intuitively either, because they're all imagistically correspondent with the ideas they're representing. That's the thing about the symbols, right?
Yeah.
You can just think about them as pictures, and they kind of disclose their meaning in an intuitive way. So what precisely should be the problem in learning a foreign symbol system? Particularly because the situation in the West is like all symbol systems are equally foreign or non-foreign in a way, because we don't take symbol at all seriously. So we're going to be learning a symbol system in either case. And we're raised in a syncretic situation now as well. Like, the symbols we have access to are already from all over the place. It's just the things we find in pop culture. So I find it weird when people kind of repeat that idea as if Jung would still say that in the present situation. I'm not sure that it ever made sense exactly to say that, but it certainly doesn't now. Like, the whole the Western identity is already quite syncretic in a way. It just doesn't acknowledge it exactly.
Yeah. No, you're right. That is funny. That is a funny thing about.
Does that or does that not relate to what you were talking about? Somehow I thought that related. I'm not sure.
No, totally no, because I mean, this idea. I think that this is something that completely confuses me all the time. How you can grab a whole lot of symbols from different mythologies.
Yeah.
Like Ishtar, Venus, whatever.
Right.
A lot of like goddess myth stuff, and you can see the similarities and reduce it all to like I mean, reduce it sounds bad, but yeah,
sure.
That you can and there is and at the same time, in an animistic kind of way or whatever, that each thing has its own kind of reality. Because if you were to completely like that's one thing that I find difficult in sync videos when I'm working on one or making one, is that I can say, okay, so this symbol is connected to this other symbol, so they are essentially the same thing. So I can say like the phoenix,
right.
The phoenix and the peacock are basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Or like a light bulb and a candle are basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And I can reach this point, which is a slightly like psychotic point, where I can even say that the light bulb, the candle, the phoenix, and the peacock are all the same thing.
Sure.
Because,
yeah.
Because the phoenix is fire and the light bulb is fire as well. And then I can end up sort of reducing it all to itself completely, to a point where I'm not even sure what I'm doing anymore.
You know what I think? I actually think that's a result of the image itself somehow. It's just the quality of pictures. Like as when you draw in big shapes and small shapes, and you're adding up layers of detail in a way. And so the thing about a symbol is, because it's a picture in some way, you can pay attention just to its shape, or you can pay attention to its shape and its internal details. And it's a question of the application, I think, largely. If you're in a hermeneutic situation that requires matching shapes at a Gestalt level, then there's no reason not to do that. That's great. If, on the other hand, you're trying to kind of focus on a level where somehow some precision is required, well, then, of course, you have to pay attention to the details more. I think it really is a matter of kind of carving out slices of the transcendental object, something like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. There is something about it's as if like the potential pathways between symbols could be maybe almost infinite. That you could sort of potentially connect peacock to elephant if you want.
Isn't it funny that Jung uses the circle or that the circle is a symbol of the self, because it's also the most general way to just represent an object, like some content. It's just, a round marker.
Yeah, sort of.
and it mathematically kind of contains infinity of it because of the curve, And it's just, it's a very good symbol, the circle. I think it does represent that point, right, where all the symbols converge into one big thing. Of course, that's a circle. Yeah.
And like, I completely agree that I think it is the way that relates to like statements like about yoga and stuff like that. That is it is strange. I didn't know this quote from Jung, but it is strange how you could he
was also talking about a different kind of yoga, I think. He was talking about yoga as a complete spiritual package. I think really he means like Hinduism or something. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah.
Because but because you do get this feeling, for example, with Jordan Peterson, maybe that he is focusing a lot on the Bible.
Yeah.
Because it is at the roots of like his family or how he grew up.
Right. Yeah.
But
he imagines that it's at the roots of Western consciousness.
Exactly. That's the problem, I think.
And Jung imagines the same thing. I think it was probably truer when Jung imagined it. Peterson seems to me quite badly out of step. I don't know how much I think the Bible is really. I mean, I know that I understand the argument, right? That Christianity created this culture in some way, and that those attitudes are still embedded in various ways. And I agree with all that. Like, I think that's all true. But I also think that's just a tiny piece of a bigger picture of what Western consciousness is today.
Yeah.
I don't even know that I think it's a primary piece. It seems more like lingering remnants of things that people are very desperately trying to get away from, in fact.
Exactly. I get the feeling that, like, let's say that he grew up in a Christian household. I don't know.
Right.
I feel that he's jumping to a big conclusion from saying, this is where, like, this is what my family were talking about at dinner.
Right.
He's jumping from that to saying this is what our whole culture is.
Yeah, I know. But aren't we all just doing that basically in one way or another?
Yeah. I mean, because that's the tricky thing I think about sync and symbol and all that because it leads to this like self thing, the circle.
Yeah.
It's like you inevitably put something in the place of the circle or something, or you say like
yeah, I know what you mean. I think
there is, like, even though it's a transcendent place that shouldn't be a specific thing.
Yeah, you have to represent it somehow.
You represent it somehow, and no, it is, and there is maybe also an element of like when someone says focus on red cars and you walk out in the street and you only see red cars or something because you're just focusing on them.
Yeah.
Or that maybe that's one of the tricky things about this research in general, that I can definitely see that, that Peterson is like seeing connections and patterns in the way that we all are or whatever.
Yeah.
But it reminds me, let's say, of this sort of danger or possibility of that maybe you end up confirming your own kind of, you're seeing what you're looking for kind of thing. Like he's not focusing on the ways in which our culture is not about Christianity.
That's right. Well, and so he'll continue to do that until he recognizes that as a problem. His approach,
Yeah.
which he probably won't now. See, this is the danger, I think, of becoming an accidental center of a cult of personality. You know,
yeah.
I don't think he at all wanted that consciously, anyway. But somehow that has happened, or is in the process of happening. And it just you know, it's extraordinary. Think about how hard it is for us not to completely drink our own Kool-Aid all the time, as complete nobodies that society largely shuns. You know?
Exactly.
Imagine that, like, we have it's not like there aren't people shunning Peterson, but he also has this army of people that are treating him as the father savior, you know?
Yeah.
I just think there's just no way that's not going to go to your head. It's gonna, no matter who you are.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a model for explaining stuff and you see that loads of people agree with you, you're probably going to stop questioning that model that much, because you think, well, I mean, and exactly, I'm trying to be like, it's very difficult. I'm trying to be as sort of, I don't know, as fair as possible, in the sense that like that it is our own shadow as well. It's not so easy as just like pointing the finger at Peterson.
Of course. I have a really bad habit with that.
but
always criticizing him for this or that thing.
But no, and exactly, and that and at the same time, I do feel a desire to criticize stuff that he says, stuff that he does, because it seems as if it's a good example of, in the same way that I'm criticizing McKenna, for example, in a different way, but just that it's a good case study of like that sync carries with it sort of dangerous kind of areas, where because it's so boundary dissolving. Ironically, because it's so boundary dissolving, you can end up putting something in the center of this big fluid mandala.
Yes,
and really
make sure you put the right thing in there. Yeah.
Really sort of anchoring it there.
Well, that's it. Well, that gets into
and I don't know.
Analysis of fascism a little bit too, right? It's like an ideology gets placed in the center of the mandala.
Yes.
Or the nation gets placed in that particular instance, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. There is something about sync that leads to abstract absolute things, and abstract absolute things. It's very easy to jump, and sync also, because it sometimes carries, like we were saying, sometimes it has an Abraxas side to it of there is no good, no evil, or whatever. But sometimes sync does carry this sort of, like in the Jungian model, this idea of health, of like
absolutely it does.
Of you have to do this and you don't have to do that, or whatever. Like go in this direction, don't go in that direction. And
yes,
of course,
it does seem that overall it has a healing orientation, I would say.
And if you abstract that to the point where you say, well, everyone needs to do this, or whatever. Like everyone needs to express their sexuality in this way. Everyone needs to.
Right. Well, that's it. Isn't sync partly about syncing into your own signal? It's
right.
It's precisely you're discovering what you need that you don't even know you need.
Yeah.
It's going to be, part, and it's just very confusing, I think, because part of what you need are common needs that all people need, right? And so that is a part of it. You're going to become aware of things that actually all people. I want to get away. I want to get away from the language of need here a little bit, but you see what I mean.
No, totally. Yeah. Well, it's kind of what we were saying in the beginning, that there is a desire, and that's why this area is so dangerous, and says because there is a desire, like with the whole Jungian project, in a sense, of trying to build maps that will help not only yourself but other people. And it's very difficult to balance this desire to help others with
Right.
like an imposition of imposing a thing on other. Like it's a very kind of weird.
Yeah. I'm detecting a general problem here that spans across a lot of domains. I think it's like it's a problem of how to know when you are when your precision is too high or something. It's like I'm quite certain that a whole bunch of stuff that this is so complicated. The first thing I have to say about it is a whole bunch of stuff that I take to be meaningful in sync, I really have the feeling is properly accidental in some way. Like,
yeah,
it's just a matter of like, there's a little visual metaphor I use in one of my videos on archive.org. It's like the A's, walking in the forest, and you come across branches kind of falling across the ground, and like if they're arranged in a way that looks, there are many ways they could be arranged, but if there are many branches that are arranged that in a way that looks like an A repetitively, right? The more you see that, the more you ID that pattern. But then it also becomes like, I think, the more likely your natural bias, which is actually there to help you kind of detect local patterns or something. Your bias is kicking in to say, okay, wow, I'm seeing a whole lot of A's around here, so I'm really going to prime myself for that. And then you start to include things in that group that don't actually have a right to be there. They're not really A's. They're kind of close to it, but you have 100 perfect ones. So it's weird. In a way, it doesn't affect the read in the end so much. As long as your read sticks to just the gestalt of it, there's just a lot of A's. Who cares if this particular one is or isn't, right?
Yeah.
So there's like a strange, unacknowledged issue, though, of where that threshold is set, I think. Like, where exactly do we draw those lines, and according to what? It seems like it comes down to an intuitive thing mostly, for me anyway. You're just trying to kind of make an interpretation that helps clarify. And so when you take an action in your attempt to understand something that clarifies rather than confuses, you think, well, maybe that was a good one, I'll keep that around. And you just keep doing that until, it's exactly like untangling cords, getting back to what we were saying the other day. You don't do that consciously, really. You just do this heuristic, actually. It's a series of behaviors that over time get you where you want to go in a kind of stochastic way, maybe. I don't know. This is all getting really abstract now. I've actually lost track of exactly where I'm at in that set of ideas. But yeah.
No, I love the thing about the A's or like exactly finding specific patterns in movies or whatever.
Right. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You can. I think there is. I really like that about if you include all of the loose things.
Yeah.
If you allow yourself to take in all of the A's that don't look exactly like an A.
Yeah.
But by doing that, you do open yourself up to amazing, uncanny A's.
Yes. Yeah.
There is, like, I remember.
Well, and you also open yourself up to being kind of led off the main path by things that look kind of like A's, but then when you look closer, maybe they're B's.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute, there's a lot of B's here as well that I didn't see before, kind of thing, So there are avenues for. Yeah, it's just you have to be ready for anything, really, with this stuff, I think.
Of course, it can open the path to something that isn't even an A, but that actually sort of exists.
Right. If you're too narrowly focused on just IDing this one pattern, you're not. It's not a receptive form of awareness, really.
It's funny. It reminds me, like, there's this book by Colin Wilson called The Occult. It's just like a big kind of introduction to the occult throughout history, and I think he's quoting, I don't know if it's Ouspensky or someone like that, saying that they initially got into the occult precisely because it was something unaccepted by culture and kind of slightly obscene, and
right,
and that through getting into all of the sort of pulp literature about it, like, I don't know, UFOs over Atlantis or whatever, those kind of sort of pulp kind of occult stuff, that through going into all that stuff, which may or may not have anything sort of very uncanny about it, you end up going into some places that maybe are more real. It's as if it's something McKenna says as well, where like he's looking at the clouds and he's stoned and he sees a UFO in the cloud. And it's like, that is the loosest way to see a UFO in the eyes of culture, because there is the possibility for you to be imagining everything. But it's as if by opening himself to that, he accesses something in the imagination, something in the projective faculty that actually catches onto stuff that is uncannily.
Totally, and that's the thing. That's the thing about the UFO and the alien abduction stuff, that was, I think, the properly subversive thing about it that culture had to erase right away in any way possible, was precisely the part of it where the literalness versus the imaginativeness were blurred in a lot of those experiences. Because if you look at a lot of the literature, like especially the John Mack stuff, like his cases, you know, some of them are so psychological. Like there's just clearly, they're not happening in normal states of consciousness, you know, whatever these experiences are. Weird things are happening, and archetypal things are happening. It can be kind of aliens 1 second, and then it's elves, you know. It's a very destabilized psychedelic space in many of these alien encounters.
Yeah. And
it's interesting how quickly people try to kind of literalize that as well. It's like, that's the alien sending you hallucinations while you're on the literal metal box in the sky, because that's what's going on, right?
Yeah.
It's weird. I think that on the other hand, though, you can't localize some pure. That would be fine, actually, if we could just say, oh, it's a weird kind of nightmare that people are having. Well, it's not just that, though, because these abduction experiences, especially, are deeply transformative for the people that have them, and there's often very weird, concrete evidence of strange stuff. That's, you know, people actually go missing, for instance, for several days or something, you know? Things like that happen. Maybe they're wandering around in the woods out of their mind. Maybe, you know, but there's a strange physicalness to some of this stuff. Or like the, I don't know if you know that this case, like the Zimbabwe school children or whatever, who...
No.
Yeah, it was. I think it happened maybe in the 90s. It was a John Mack thing, actually. There's a documentary being made about it now, I believe. But all these school kids saw this craft land in like the playground of their school, basically, and a figure emerged from it and interacted with them. It was like I don't remember how many kids, but it was like a substantial, like more than a couple. It was like 30 or 40 kids, I think, all saw this thing. Some of the teachers saw it, I think. It was really, you know, if it was a psychical thing, it was some kind of mass hallucination sort of scenario, which is interesting all on its own, obviously. But so yeah, it can't be both. It can't be allowed to be both.
Yeah. No, I know
if it's literally aliens, somehow that's fine. It's weird that culture is comfortable with that, because that's quite a bit more frightening to me. In a certain way, like if it's literal aliens, then you have no idea if they're violent or gonna, you know, they're just some other meatbags in a fancy car, showing up to, you know, have an altercation with you potentially. But that's fine, I guess, because we imagine that we can defeat them with our missiles. The other thing, you just have no, like, it's in your head in a way that's inextricable. So aim a missile at your own brain, you know.
And it's funny because, like you say, it weirdly gives a certain, you're right, it's slightly less frightening. It even gives us some peace to imagine that you are psychologically connected to it.
Yeah.
Because even though, like, even when very real things are happening, physical effects are being had, if you are connected to it in some way, there is nothing you can do to escape. There is a certain kind of surrender to the experience. Sometimes I think that when you completely externalize them, exactly, you have to figure out whether they're good or bad. But if they're inside you, then if they're bad, there's something about you that's bad. If they're good, there's something about you. Like there's a sort of the weird kind of and I love the thing about physical effects. Exactly. I mean, I remember there's that Robert Anton Wilson thing in Cosmic Trigger about a UFO that lands and an alien comes out and hands this guy some pancakes or something.
Yeah.
And then like the actual sort of like that or sort of people sort of being teleported to different places.
That's very funny you mentioned pancakes because I'm making pancakes with my dad in like 10 minutes. So I have to wrap this up soon.
Oh, good point. Yeah, actually, I should wrap it up as well. Yeah.
How long are these podcast episodes going to be?
Yeah, good point. I mean, this one is 2 hours and 15 minutes.
All right. Long form. I think that's good. There's this.
Yeah.
Doug is holding down 42 minutes. Like, fantastic. So.
Yes, exactly.
We can pick up the super long format ramble.
But no, I mean, I love it. Like you say, culture seems to be afraid of that because, and what you were saying, sync brings it back to the personal in some way as well. And that's what I like about the alchemy and the alchemical perspective, that there is something about, like Terence McKenna says, reclaiming your personal experience, that if you see a shadow on the wall and it makes a shape which is synchronized with something that the TV is saying or something, like the shape of a cat appears on the wall and it's a shadow and only you can see it from a specific angle. Whatever, those kind of like personal things like that. There is something that simultaneously it reclaims your subjectivity and, like you say, it explores things that are extremely physically real. I love how those two things interact.
We love it. It scares most people.
Oh no, totally.
They're just freaked out. Yeah.
Oh, and I mean, and of course, I mean, we've spoken about this, but and obviously
it scares me too. That's the thing. I just like it.
It freaks us out. I mean,
yeah.
There have been times when, it's been sort of like terrifying.
Totally. Yeah. Exactly.
And so, anyway, so UFOs are an interesting case of this sort of like weird mix between like a sort of an animism, an idealism that becomes physically solid, and a materialism that dissolves into the dream world. Like
exactly.
Kind of thing. It's weird.
Have you read Jung's UFO book?
I did. I read it years ago. It was one of the first things I read about Jung.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't think I read it without sort of knowing anything about Jung. So I would love to read it again, actually.
It's one that I've started a number of times, but just kept getting distracted by other things for some reason. But I love the bits I read. Like it seems like I'm sure he does a good job with the material. It should be an interesting read. Yeah.
Anyway, talking about like mandalic circular UFO shapes, pancakes are a good kind of.
True. Well, they're also arranged in stacks typically. Which, for people listening that don't know anything about me, that's a term I'm obsessed with in my sync analysis project. By stack, I usually just mean a coincidence that exists in some kind of a set of coincidences all happening more or less at the same time, that kind of thing. It's just a way of grading like sync weight, essentially.
Yeah, no, I love, I mean, there's so much, that's the thing that on the one hand, there is like you were saying, there's the whole sort of Heideggerian thing of developing too many terms. But on the other hand, I think there is a need to explore new terminology. Yeah,
we need a few new terms, and also some of Jung's terms are awful. What was it we were saying? Enantiodromia or whatever. Some of his words are atrocious.
Yeah, no, I'm not even going to try.
Be replaced as soon as possible.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, this was really, I think,
awesome.
I really enjoyed this. I hope that other humans will enjoy voyeuristically listening to it. That's antagonistic to the audience, right? I shouldn't say things like that.
But we're in a Hellraiser mood at the moment. So
yeah, we are. See, I quite celebrate voyeurism, really. So it's all good in my.
Anyway, no, wow, yeah, I'm really happy with how this went. I had amazing time.
Yeah, me too. Great. Well, hopefully it all recorded. The real bummer to lose it. I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Awesome. Well,
okay, yes. I guess we're officially ending the podcast section of this now. So here's the edit point right here. Bye, everybody.
Yes. Bye.